By the age of 32, one man had conquered 3 million square miles of territory. He had never lost a battle. He had brought kings to their knees and made himself a living god. And then, suddenly, mysteriously, he died. This is the story of Alexander the Great, but not the one you think you know. Because before he was a conqueror, he was a boy. A deeply traumatized, brilliant, terrifying boy who learned that love and violence were the same language. The year is 356 BC. In the rugged mountains of Macedonia, a kingdom most Greeks considered barbaric, a child is born during a thunderstorm. His father, Philip II, is a brutal military genius who's transforming Macedonia from a backwater into a powerhouse. Philip has already lost an eye in battle. He's ruthless, calculating, and he collects wives like other men collect swords. Alexander's mother, Olympias, is his fourth wife, a princess from Epirus who practices snake-worshipping rituals and claims descent from Achilles himself. From the moment Alexander takes his first breath, his parents are at war. Not with enemies, but with each other. Olympias is obsessive, possessive, convinced her son is destined for godhood. She whispers to him in the dark, tells him his real father isn't Philip at all, but Zeus, king of the gods. Philip, meanwhile, sees his son as a tool, a weapon to be sharpened. The palace becomes a battlefield of psychological warfare, and young Alexander is caught in the crossfire. By age 7, Alexander witnesses his father's violence firsthand. Philip publicly humiliates Olympias, takes another wife, and the palace descends into chaos. At a wedding feast, drunk and enraged, Philip draws his sword on his own son. The king is so intoxicated he trips and falls. Alexander stands over his father and says words that will echo through history. Here is the man who was making ready to cross from Europe to Asia, and who cannot even cross from couch to couch without losing his balance. It's a devastating moment. The boy has just humiliated the most powerful man in Macedonia. And he's learned something crucial: words can be weapons too. But the price is exile. Alexander and his mother flee to Epirus, outcasts from their own kingdom. This exile shapes everything. For months, Alexander lives in uncertainty, watching his mother plot revenge, learning that power is never stable, that trust is a luxury, that family can be your greatest enemy. When Philip finally recalls them, Alexander returns changed. Harder. More calculating. He's 13 years old, and he's already survived a war most people never fight, the war inside a broken family. Philip decides his son needs proper education. He hires the greatest philosopher in the Greek world, Aristotle. For 3 years, in a quiet sanctuary called Mysa, Alexander studies everything: philosophy, medicine, geometry, poetry. But it's Homer's Iliad that obsesses him. He memorizes every line about Achilles, his supposed ancestor, the greatest warrior who ever lived, who chose glory over long life. Alexander sleeps with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, next to a dagger. But Aristotle teaches him something else too, that Greeks are superior to all other peoples, that the barbarians of Persia and beyond are meant to be ruled. It's a toxic idea that will fuel everything Alexander does. He's not just being educated. He's being programmed. At 16, Alexander gets his first taste of real power. Philip leaves him in charge of Macedonia while he wages war elsewhere. Almost immediately, a Thracian tribe rebels. Most 16-year-olds would panic. Alexander raises an army, crushes the rebellion, and establishes a city named after himself, Alexandropolis. His first conquest. His first city. His first taste of what it feels like to reshape the world. 2 years later, everything changes. At the Battle of Chaeronea, where Philip faces the combined armies of Athens and Thebes, Alexander leads the cavalry charge that breaks the Greek lines. He's 18 years old, and he's just helped his father conquer Greece. The boy is becoming the weapon Philip always wanted. But there's a problem: Alexander is becoming too good. Too ambitious. too hungry. And Philip is starting to fear his own son. The question isn't whether Alexander will explode. It's when. And what will be left standing when he does. The year is 337 BC, and the Macedonian court is about to implode. Philip has just married again, his seventh wife, a young Macedonian noblewoman named Cleopatra. This isn't just another political marriage. This is an insult, a declaration. Because Cleopatra is fully Macedonian, and Olympias is not. At the wedding feast, Cleopatra's uncle stands up, drunk with wine and malice, and makes a toast. He prays that Philip will finally have a legitimate heir, a pure Macedonian son. The implication is clear: Alexander, with his Epirote mother, is a bastard. Alexander explodes. He hurls his cup at the man and screams, "What am I then? A bastard?" Philip, equally drunk, draws his sword and lurches toward his own son. For the second time in Alexander's life, his father tries to kill him. And for the second time, Philip falls. This time, Alexander doesn't make a joke. He speaks with cold fury. Here is the man who would cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from couch to couch. The same words. But now they carry the weight of a threat. Within hours, Alexander and Olympias are exiled again. But this time, Alexander isn't a frightened child. He's a 20-year-old general who commands loyalty, who has proven himself in battle, who has tasted power. And he's done being humiliated. For months, the kingdom teeters on the edge of civil war. Philip knows he's made a catastrophic mistake. Alexander has too many supporters, too much charisma, too much of his father's own dangerous brilliance. Philip needs his son back, but neither man will bend. It's Demaratus, an old family friend, who finally brokers a reconciliation. Alexander returns to Pella, the capital, but the damage is done. The bond between father and son, already fractured, is now shattered beyond repair. Philip tries to move forward. He announces his greatest ambition yet, an invasion of Persia, the mightiest empire on earth. For 200 years, Persia has been the boogeyman of the Greek world, the vast eastern power that once tried to conquer Greece itself. Now Philip will take revenge. He'll unite all Greeks under Macedonian leadership and lead them in a holy war against the barbarian Persians. It's brilliant propaganda. It's also true that Philip wants the unimaginable wealth of the Persian Empire. But there's a problem festering in the palace. A young Macedonian nobleman named Pausanias, once Philip's lover, has been brutally assaulted by associates of the king's new father-in-law. When Pausanias begs Philip for justice, the king refuses, too worried about offending his new wife's family. Pausanias is humiliated, destroyed, burning with rage. And someone, we'll never know who, whispers in his ear. Someone tells him that there's only one way to restore his honor. October 336 BC. The royal court gathers at Aegae for the wedding of Alexander's sister. It's a massive celebration, a show of power and unity. Philip arrives at the theater in a white robe, walking alone between his bodyguards to demonstrate his fearlessness, his invincibility. The crowd roars. Philip smiles. He's at the height of his power, on the verge of his greatest campaign. And then Pausanias strikes. The blade goes in between Philip's ribs, straight into his heart. The king of Macedonia, the man who conquered Greece, who built an unstoppable army, who was preparing to invade an empire, collapses in the doorway of the theater. Blood pools on ancient stones. Pausanias runs for horses stationed outside, but Philip's bodyguards chase him down and kill him on the spot. Some say he tripped on a vine. Some say the bodyguards wanted him dead before he could talk. Either way, Pausanias dies with his secrets. And just like that, everything changes. Philip is dead. The kingdom that took decades to build could shatter in days. Rival claimants to the throne, foreign enemies, Greek city-states that chafe under Macedonian rule, all of them see opportunity. The question everyone is asking, in whispers and in fear, is simple: who ordered the assassination? Suspicion immediately falls on Olympias. She had motive, she had access, and she had the ruthlessness. Some ancient sources claim she placed a crown on Pausanias's corpse, a sign of honor. Others say she had his body burned and erected a tomb over his ashes. But the truth is murkier, darker, more complex. Because there's another suspect, Alexander himself. Did Alexander know? Did he plan it? The evidence is circumstantial, but it's there. He had everything to gain. He was in position to seize power immediately. And he moved with a speed that suggests preparation. Within hours of Philip's death, Alexander is securing the loyalty of the army. Within days, he's eliminating rivals. Cleopatra, Philip's last wife, and her infant son, the legitimate heir that Pausanias's assassin's uncle had toasted to, they're both murdered. By Olympias's orders, officially. But Alexander doesn't punish his mother. He doesn't even pretend to investigate. The message is clear. Anyone who challenges Alexander will die. And he doesn't care if you're family. Alexander is 20 years old. He's now king of Macedonia, but it's a poisoned throne. The Greek city-states immediately rebel. They think this boy king will be weak, easily overthrown. Thebes declares independence. Athens celebrates Philip's death. Rumors spread that Alexander himself is dead, killed in battles to the north. The Greeks are preparing to throw off the Macedonian yoke. They have no idea what's coming. Alexander moves with terrifying speed. He marches south with his army so quickly that the Greeks don't believe it's possible. When he appears at the gates of Thebes, the city is stunned. He offers terms: submit, and live. The Thebans refuse. They think their walls will protect them. They think this untested boy won't have his father's ruthlessness. They're wrong. Alexander takes Thebes in a single day. And then he makes a decision that will echo through history. He doesn't just conquer the city. He erases it. 6,000 Thebans are slaughtered. 30,000 are sold into slavery. The city is burned to the ground, every building except the temples and the house of the poet Pindar, reduced to ash and rubble. It's a message written in blood and smoke: this is what happens when you defy Alexander. Greece goes silent. Athens, that great democracy that once stood against Persia, sends an embassy of terrified diplomats begging for mercy. Alexander grants it. He doesn't need to destroy Athens. Thebes has already done his work for him. Every Greek city-state now understands, the boy king is not his father. He's something worse. Something more dangerous. He's Alexander. And he's just getting started. Spring, 334 BC. Alexander stands at the edge of Europe, staring across the Hellespont at Asia. Behind him, 35,000 men, the finest fighting force the world has ever seen. Ahead of him, the Persian Empire, stretching from the Mediterranean to India, ruled by Darius III, commanding armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The odds are insane. The ambition is insane. And that's exactly why Alexander is doing it. But before his army crosses, Alexander does something extraordinary. He sails ahead to the Asian shore, and as his ship approaches land, he hurls his spear into the beach. It's a symbolic gesture, claiming Asia as Spear-Won territory. Then he leaps off the boat in full armor and becomes the first Macedonian to set foot on Asian soil. He races to the site of ancient Troy, where his hero Achilles fought and died. There, he strips naked, anoints himself with oil, and runs around Achilles' tomb with his closest companion, Hephaestion. He places a crown on the tomb and declares himself Achilles reborn. It's theatrical. It's grandiose. It's perfect propaganda. His men believe they're not just invading an empire, they're fulfilling an epic destiny written by the gods themselves. Alexander isn't just a king. He's a myth walking. The Persians are waiting for him. At the Granicus River, a modest stream in what is now Turkey, Persian commanders have assembled a force of 40,000 men. They position their cavalry on the far bank, a wall of armored horsemen, and they wait. It's late afternoon. Any sensible general would make camp, rest his troops, and attack at dawn. Alexander attacks immediately. He leads the charge himself. This is what makes Alexander different from every other king in history. He doesn't command from the rear. He's at the front, on his massive black warhorse Bucephalus, crashing into the Persian cavalry like a thunderbolt. It's suicidal. It's insane. And it nearly kills him. A Persian commander named Spithridates swings his sword at Alexander's head. The blade cuts through Alexander's helmet and stops just short of his skull. As Spithridates raises his weapon for the killing blow, Clitus, one of Alexander's commanders, drives his spear through the Persian's chest. Alexander is saved by inches. But he doesn't retreat. He keeps fighting, covered in blood, his helmet split open, until the Persian line breaks. The Battle of Granicus is a massacre. The Persian cavalry is destroyed. 2,000 Persian soldiers are killed. But Alexander reserves his greatest fury for the Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia, men he considers traitors. Of the Greek mercenaries captured, nearly all are killed or enslaved. Only 2,000 are sent back to Macedonia in chains, to work as slaves for the rest of their lives. The message is clear: Greeks who betray Alexander will face a fate worse than death. Alexander pushes deeper into Asia Minor. City after city opens its gates. Some out of fear. Some out of hope. Because Alexander is offering something unexpected: liberation. The Persian Empire rules through satraps, governors who extract wealth and crush rebellion. Alexander promises Greek culture, reduced taxes, and autonomy. It's brilliant strategy. He's not just conquering, he's winning hearts. At Gordium, the ancient capital of Phrygia, Alexander encounters the legendary Gordian knot. According to prophecy, whoever unties this impossibly complex knot will rule all of Asia. Men have tried for centuries. The knot has remained tied. Alexander studies it for a moment, then draws his sword and cuts it in half. Some accounts say he pulled out the linchpin instead, but the symbolic message is the same: Alexander doesn't play by the old rules. He makes his own. And destiny bends to his will. But reality is catching up with him. Darius III, the king of kings, the ruler of Persia, has finally assembled his response. At Issus, in a narrow coastal plain in southern Turkey, Darius brings an army that outnumbers Alexander's forces at least 2 to 1, possibly 3 to 1. Ancient sources claim absurd numbers, hundreds of thousands, but even conservative estimates put the Persians at a massive advantage. Darius himself leads them, riding in a magnificent chariot, wearing the royal purple, commanding from the center of his line. Alexander should be terrified. He's 22 years old, deep in enemy territory, facing the full might of the world's greatest empire. Instead, he attacks. The Battle of Issus becomes legend even as it's being fought. Alexander leads his companion cavalry in a devastating wedge formation, crashing through the Persian left flank. But he's not aiming for a tactical advantage. He's aiming for Darius himself. Alexander charges directly at the Persian king, cutting through the immortals, Persia's elite royal guard, driving straight toward the man on the chariot. Darius sees him coming. Sees this young Macedonian king covered in blood and glory, unstoppable, inhuman. And Darius breaks. The king of kings, ruler of millions, turns his chariot and flees. His personal guard tries to stop Alexander, and they die. The Persian center, seeing their king retreat, collapses into panic. What begins as an orderly withdrawal becomes a rout, becomes a massacre. The Persians lose over 50,000 men. The Macedonians lose fewer than 500. Alexander captures Darius's camp, his treasure, his personal possessions. And he captures something more valuable: Darius's mother, wife, and daughters. The royal family of Persia is now Alexander's prisoners. Here, Alexander shows a different side. He treats the Persian royal women with extraordinary respect, refuses to harm them, addresses Darius's mother as if she were his own. It's strategic, yes, but it's also genuine. Alexander is capable of shocking brutality, but he's also capable of mercy. The contradiction is what makes him terrifying. You never know which Alexander you'll meet. Darius sends a letter. He offers Alexander a ransom for his family, 10,000 talents of gold, and a peace treaty that would give Alexander control of everything west of the Euphrates River, essentially half the Persian Empire. It's an extraordinary offer. Alexander's general Parmenion says, "Would accept if I were Alexander." Alexander replies, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." He rejects the offer. Not because he's greedy. Because he's already seen the truth: Persia is hollow. Its armies are massive but brittle. Its king is weak. And Alexander, this 22-year-old who was humiliated by his father, exiled by his family, who clawed his way to power through blood and brilliance, he's realized something intoxicating and terrifying. He can take it all. Alexander doesn't want half an empire. He doesn't want a negotiated peace or a strategic victory. He wants what Achilles wanted, what the heroes of old wanted, what whispers to him from his childhood dreams and his mother's prophecies. He wants immortality. He wants his name carved into history so deeply that 3,000 years from now, people will still speak it with awe. And he's willing to burn the world to get it. The conquest is no longer about Persia. It's about Alexander's place among the gods. And nothing, not armies, not deserts, not reality itself, will stand in his way. January 332 BC. Alexander stands before Tyre, and for the first time in his life, someone tells him no. Tyre is not just a city. It's a statement of impossibility. Built on an island half a mile offshore, surrounded by walls 150 feet high, supplied by the sea, defended by the Phoenician navy, Tyre has never been conquered. When Alexander sends ambassadors requesting the city's surrender, the Tyrians throw them off the walls. The message is clear. You may have beaten Persia on land, boy king, but you cannot touch us here. Any rational commander would bypass Tyre, continue the campaign, come back later. But rationality has never been Alexander's strength. The rejection ignites something in him, the same fury he felt when his father drew a sword on him, when Athens mocked him, when anyone dared suggest he had limits. Alexander doesn't just want to conquer Tyre. He wants to teach the world that nothing is beyond his reach. So he attempts the impossible. He orders his engineers to build a causeway, a land bridge from the mainland to the island, through half a mile of open sea. His men think he's insane. The Tyrians think he's insane. But day after day, stone by stone, the causeway grows. Alexander's soldiers dump thousands of tons of rock and timber into the Mediterranean, building a road where nature never intended one to exist. The Tyrians fight back with everything they have. They send fire ships to burn the causeway. They rain arrows and burning sand from their walls. They drop boulders that shatter the siege engines. The siege becomes a nightmare of innovation and counter-innovation. Alexander builds taller towers. The Tyrians build their walls higher. Alexander's engineers create armored ships with battering rams. The Tyrians deploy divers to cut the anchors. For 7 months, the siege grinds on. Men die by the thousands. Alexander himself is wounded multiple times, but he refuses to leave the front lines. He's everywhere at once, directing engineers, leading assaults, inspiring his men through sheer force of will. His soldiers are exhausted, but they can't quit. Because if Alexander won't quit, how can they? Finally, in August, the walls break. Alexander's siege towers reach the battlements. His soldiers pour into Tyre like a flood of bronze and rage. What follows is one of the darkest moments in Alexander's campaign. The Tyrians, who fought with such courage, now pay the price for their defiance. 8,000 Tyrian soldiers are killed. 30,000 civilians are sold into slavery. 2,000 men of military age are crucified on the beach, a forest of crosses stretching along the shore. It's brutal. It's excessive. It's calculated. Because Alexander wants every city from here to India to know, resistance ends in annihilation. Surrender, and live. Fight, and become a warning to others. But Egypt tells a different story. When Alexander arrives in late 332 BC, the Egyptians welcome him as a liberator. The Persians have ruled Egypt for 2 centuries, crushing rebellions, desecrating temples, treating the ancient kingdom as a colony to be exploited. Alexander, by contrast, honors Egyptian gods, restores temples, and declares himself pharaoh in the traditional manner. The Egyptians crown him as their king. They give him the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. They call him son of Ra, the sun god. And Alexander, the student of Aristotle, the Greek who was taught that his culture was superior to all others, accepts these honors with genuine reverence. This is the paradox of Alexander: he's capable of horrific violence and profound respect, often in the same breath. But Egypt gives Alexander something more intoxicating than a crown. It gives him divinity. Alexander travels across the desert to the Oracle of Siwa, an ancient temple in the middle of nowhere, where the priest of Ammon speaks the words of God. The journey itself is treacherous. His convoy gets lost in a sandstorm. Ancient sources claim ravens guide them to the oracle, or that rain falls miraculously. Whatever the truth, Alexander reaches Siwa, and he enters the inner sanctum alone. What happens inside, no one knows. Alexander never fully reveals it. But when he emerges, something has changed. The priest has apparently confirmed what Olympias whispered to him as a child: Alexander is not the son of Philip. He is the son of Zeus Ammon. He is divine. He is a god walking among mortals. Does Alexander believe it? That's the terrifying question. Maybe at first it's just propaganda, a useful tool to awe his subjects and legitimize his rule. But over time, the line between performance and belief begins to blur. When everyone treats you as a god, when you've accomplished things that seem impossible, when you've never lost a battle, when you've conquered half the known world by age 25, how long before you start to believe your own mythology? Alexander leaves Egypt transformed. He founds a city at the mouth of the Nile and names it after himself, Alexandria. It will become one of the greatest cities in history, home to the famous library, the lighthouse, a center of learning and culture. But Alexander doesn't stay to see it built. He has unfinished business with Darius. The King of Kings has assembled a new army, the largest the ancient world has ever seen. At Gaugamela, in the plains of northern Iraq, Darius has chosen his battlefield. The ground is leveled, perfect for his chariots and cavalry. He has scythed chariots with blades on the wheels, designed to slice through infantry. He has war elephants. He has cavalry from every corner of his empire. Ancient sources claim 1 million men, which is absurd, but even conservative estimates put the Persian army at over 100,000. Alexander has 40,000. October 1, 331 BC. Dawn breaks over Gaugamela. Alexander has spent the night studying the battlefield, planning every move. His generals beg him to attack at night, to use surprise. Alexander refuses. He says, "I will not steal victory." But the truth is darker. Alexander wants Darius to see him coming. He wants the King of Kings to watch as everything he built crumbles. This isn't just about conquest anymore. It's personal. The battle begins with Darius's scythed chariots thundering toward the Macedonian lines. They're terrifying, blades spinning, designed to create panic. But Alexander's men simply open their ranks, let the chariots pass through, then close again and kill the drivers. The great Persian weapon becomes a useless spectacle. Then Alexander does what he always does. He finds the weak point in the Persian line, the gap between the left and center, and he drives his companion cavalry straight into it like a spear through flesh. But this time, he's not just targeting the flank. He's driving directly, once again, toward Darius. The King of Kings sees him coming. Sees this Macedonian, this god-king, this unstoppable force tearing through his guard. And for the second time, Darius turns and runs. His chariot races from the battlefield, and with it goes the Persian will to fight. The army doesn't just lose. It disintegrates. Alexander pursues Darius for miles, trying to capture him, but the Persian king escapes into the night. 50,000 Persians lie dead on the field. The Macedonians lose fewer than 1,000. The Persian Empire, the greatest power on earth for 2 centuries, has just been destroyed in an afternoon. Alexander stands on the battlefield as the sun sets, covered in dust and blood and glory. He's 25 years old. He's conquered everything from Greece to Egypt to the heart of Persia. And the terrifying thing, the thing that should make the world tremble, is that he's not satisfied. He's not even close. Winter, 330 BC. Alexander enters Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia, and discovers wealth beyond imagination. 120,000 talents of gold and silver, enough to fund his army for decades, enough to make him the richest man in the world. He sits on the throne of the King of Kings, the seat where Darius once ruled, where Xerxes and Cyrus the Great once sat. It should be his greatest triumph. Instead, something breaks inside him. For months, Alexander allows his army to plunder Persepolis. The soldiers rampage through the city, taking everything, destroying priceless art, killing civilians. It's chaos, and Alexander, who usually maintains iron discipline, lets it happen. Then, during a drunken banquet, a courtesan named Thais suggests they burn the palace of Xerxes, the Persian king who once burned Athens. The symbolism is perfect: Greek revenge on Persia, the completion of a 200-year-old grudge. Alexander, drunk and lost in his own mythology, picks up a torch. He leads a procession through the palace, setting fire to one of the most magnificent buildings in the ancient world. The flames consume rooms that took generations to build, destroy art and architecture that can never be replaced. By morning, when Alexander sobers up, he reportedly regrets what he's done. But regret doesn't rebuild Persepolis. The damage is permanent, the message sent. The old world is burning, and Alexander is building a new one on its ashes. But Darius is still alive, still running. Alexander pursues him across Persia, through deserts and mountains, driven by an obsession to capture the man who dared to face him. The chase becomes epic, covering hundreds of miles, weeks of relentless pursuit. Finally, in the summer of 330 BC, Alexander finds him. Darius is dead, murdered by his own generals, who hoped to buy their freedom by killing their king. Alexander arrives to find the King of Kings lying in a wagon, mortally wounded, dying of thirst and betrayal. Ancient sources say Alexander wept, covered Darius's body with his own cloak, and sent it back to Persepolis for a royal burial. Whether this happened or is propaganda, it reveals how Alexander sees himself, not as a conqueror, but as the rightful heir to Persia, avenging a murdered predecessor. With Darius dead, Alexander declares himself king of Asia. But the title isn't enough. He begins adopting Persian customs, wearing Persian royal dress, performing the Persian court ritual of proskynesis, where subjects prostrate themselves before the king. To the Persians, it's normal. To the Macedonians and Greeks, it's blasphemy. Free men don't bow to anyone, not even kings. Alexander's oldest companions are horrified. They didn't follow him across the world to watch him become a Persian despot. Tensions explode. At a banquet, Alexander's historian Callisthenes refuses to perform proskynesis, publicly humiliating the king. Alexander is furious, but he can't simply execute a prominent Greek. Not yet. But the paranoia is growing. Alexander drinks more heavily, becomes more erratic, more convinced of his own divinity. At another drunken banquet in Marikanda, modern Samarkand, his closest friends are celebrating, telling stories of Alexander's victories. Clitus, the man who saved Alexander's life at the Granicus River, gets drunk and angry. He's sick of the flattery, sick of watching Alexander abandon Macedonian values for Persian luxury. Clitus starts shouting. He reminds Alexander that his victories belong to the army, not to him alone. He invokes Philip's name, says Alexander would be nothing without his father's groundwork. It's the worst thing he could possibly say. The one wound that never heals, the one insult Alexander cannot tolerate. Alexander grabs a spear from a guard. His friends try to restrain him, but Alexander breaks free. He hurls the spear across the room. It goes through Clitus's chest, killing him instantly. The tent goes silent. Alexander stares at what he's done, at the man who saved his life bleeding out on the floor, and he collapses. For 3 days, Alexander locks himself in his tent, refusing food or water, sobbing, calling Clitus's name. It's the first time Alexander has killed one of his own in rage. It won't be the last. The campaign continues, but the dream is souring. Alexander pushes into Central Asia, fighting brutal guerrilla warfare against tribes who refuse to submit. He crosses into Afghanistan, into the mountains of the Hindu Kush. His army is exhausted, stretched thin, fighting enemies who won't stand and face them but disappear into the mountains and strike from ambush. Then comes the conspiracy. Pages in Alexander's court, young men from noble families, plot to assassinate him. The conspiracy is discovered, and under torture, they implicate Callisthenes, Alexander's historian, the man who refused to bow. There's no real evidence, but Alexander doesn't care. Callisthenes is arrested, imprisoned, and dies in chains, possibly executed, possibly from illness. The message is clear, even proximity to treason is death. Alexander's friends begin to realize, the king they followed has become something else. The brilliant young commander who inspired loyalty through charisma and courage now rules through fear. The man who honored his enemies and showed mercy has become paranoid, cruel, drunk on power and wine. The line between Alexander and the tyrants he conquered has disappeared. But Alexander isn't done. He crosses into India, into the Punjab, and wins his final great battle at the Hydaspes River against King Porus and his war elephants. It's a tactical masterpiece, crossing a flooding river in a monsoon, defeating elephants, showing once again that Alexander is the greatest military mind of his age. But his army, his loyal Macedonians who followed him for 11 years and 20,000 miles, they finally break. At the Hyphasis River, in the summer of 326 BC, the Macedonians refuse to march further. They've heard rumors of vast Indian armies beyond the river, of more kingdoms, more wars, more years of marching. They're exhausted, wounded, sick with tropical diseases. They want to go home. They want to see the families they left behind a decade ago. They want the conquest to end. Alexander rages. He retreats to his tent for 3 days, refusing to see anyone, trying to break their will through sulking. But for the first time in his life, his men don't break. They sit in the rain and wait for him to accept reality. Finally, Alexander emerges. He sacrifices to the gods, and the omens, conveniently, are unfavorable for crossing the river. He announces they will turn back. The army erupts in cheers and tears. But for Alexander, it's not victory. It's the first time he's been told no and couldn't punish the people who said it. The first time his will has been defeated. He's conquered everything from Greece to India, built the largest empire in history, achieved immortality. And it's not enough. It will never be enough. The return journey is a nightmare. Alexander leads his army through the Gedrosian Desert, one of the harshest environments on Earth, rather than take the easier coastal route. Ancient sources say he's trying to outdo Cyrus and Semiramis, legendary conquerors who failed to cross this desert. Or maybe he's punishing his men for refusing to march further. Thousands die of thirst, heat, and starvation. The once magnificent army, the phalanx that conquered the world, is reduced to a desperate column of dying men. By 323 BC, Alexander is back in Babylon, planning new conquests. Arabia. The Western Mediterranean. He's 32 years old, and he's already achieved more than any human in history. But he can't stop. Conquest is the only language he knows. Victory is the only thing that fills the void inside him. Then, after a long banquet, Alexander falls ill. Fever ravages him for 10 days. His generals gather around his bed, watching the unstoppable conqueror reduced to a sweating, delirious shell. They ask him who should inherit the empire. Ancient sources give different answers. Some say he whispered to the strongest. Some say he gave his ring to Perdiccas. Some say he couldn't speak at all. On June 10 or 11, 323 BC, Alexander the Great dies. He's 32 years old. He's conquered 3 million square miles, defeated every army he faced, built an empire that stretches from Greece to India, and changed the course of human history. And the cause of death? No one knows for certain. Malaria, typhoid fever, poisoning, complications from alcoholism, the theories multiply but the truth is lost. What we do know is this: the empire he built dies with him. His generals, the men who fought beside him, immediately turn on each other, carving up his conquests in 40 years of brutal warfare. His wife and son are murdered. His bloodline is extinguished. Everything he built collapses into chaos. But his name? His name endures. 23 centuries later, we still speak of Alexander the Great. Soldiers still study his tactics. Philosophers still debate his legacy. He achieved the only thing he truly wanted: immortality. He was a military genius and a mass murderer. A liberator and a tyrant. A man who honored his enemies and killed his friends. A visionary who spread Greek culture across the known world and a drunk who burned one of the world's greatest cities in a fit of rage. He was traumatized by his childhood, brilliant beyond measure, and utterly incapable of being satisfied. Alexander conquered the known world. But he never conquered himself. And in the end, that's what killed him. Not an enemy's blade, but his own limitless, insatiable, burning need for more. The boy who learned to kill became the man who couldn't stop. And that's the real tragedy of Alexander the Great.